We are about to bring you coverage of the semifinals here. I mean, this has been a pretty exciting weekend. We've watched Team TCG player just put up a dominating performance. Now we're down to 4 players left in a field of... Oh, here's the bracket right here. So we see Brad Nelson, a member of Team TCG player. Steve Rubin, a member of Team TCG player. Jack Fogle, a member of Team TCG player. And then Hall of Famer Ben Stark. All still in the running here. And this is a pretty interesting top 4. I mean, so what are you expecting to see out of the match between Brad Nelson and Jack Fogle?
Brad Nelson is playing an Abzan control deck, and the matchup against Sultai control really hinges on dig through time, in my experience. So if the Sultai deck takes too long to generate that advantage, or maybe doesn't start off with a Wayfinder, has these clunkier cards stuck in hand, then the creature deck is favored.
Okay, well, it looks like the players are actually ready down there in the feature match area, so let's go see some semifinal action.
Players in standard number 8.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the semifinals of Grand Prix Memphis. On our left, we have Ben Stark, and you see him right there, Hall of Famer, Pro Tour champion, now in his, I don't know how many Grand Prix top 8s he's had, but it's a lot. And he's here battling with red-white Aggro. He was the 6th seed coming in. He had a pretty rough matchup against Chris Fennell in the quarterfinals, but he was able to squeak that out. And his opponent is Steve Rubin, playing the Abzan control deck that Ben already had to battle his way through in the quarterfinals. So, looks like Steve's going down to 6 cards, and that's got to bode well for Ben Stark here. So, when looking at this matchup, pre-board, on the play, who do you think would be favored here? Pre-board, who do you think is going to be favored here?
I really like the white-red aggro here, and that's really only because of the particular version that Ben is playing. He has the full 4 outpost sieges. And I know that Steve Rubin has 2 other ends, so he has some ways to deal with enchantments in his main deck, but still, that's huge. It just gives Ben inevitability in a deck that has also the 4 Soulfire Grandmaster, so he doesn't actually have to be afraid to flood out. And he's crediting Soulfire Grandmaster to his success this weekend.
Yeah, and the fact that Ben has 8 different 2-drops in his deck is much different than the other red-white decks we've been seeing as of late. Most people will have 4 copies of Secret of the Way, but Soulfire Grandmaster is usually only seen as a 1 or a 2-up. Ben chose to play a full 4 copies, and it's clearly working out for him here.
And something really interesting that he told me, Ben always happy to share his wisdom. He has the Stormbreath Dragons in the sideboard, right? So what he tells me is, look at Stormbreath Dragon, look at Outpost Siege, and look at Soulfire Grandmaster. Outpost Siege is a card that wants games to go longer, because you generate an advantage. Stormbreath Dragon, on the other hand, is a card that wants to finish games. So there is an anti-synergy of a sort. And also having a 5-drop with the Khan's ability of Outpost Siege is not optimal. You might sometimes actually not get 2 cards out of your turn that way. On the other hand, Soulfire Grandmaster, as he told me, I'm just quoting him, drags out the game, puts you out of reach, and ensures that you're winning the late game because of its powerful abilities. So he's just simply saying Soulfire Grandmaster is better in an Outpost Siege deck than Stormbreath Dragon is.
That's very interesting, and I'm sure that'll affect the way people are building that deck in the future. I mean, this is one of the major archetypes in Standard right now, and Ben Stark definitely making some changes there that are going to have sweeping effects on the entire metagame. Ooh, Steve now dropping down to 5 cards here, so he'll have to continue shuffling, and it's not where you want to be, going down to 5 cards. He's on the draw, so I mean, he'll be able to hopefully find that 3rd and 4th land drop, but
8 temples definitely helpful there,
yes,
because you do get to see more cards, and we are looking at a mainstay of the format, 4 Courser of Kruphix, 4 Siege Rhino, and a bunch of card advantage effects next to all these removal spells. So definitely the tools to catch up. It's really a matter of not falling behind too quickly.
Okay, while we wait for them to finish up their mulligans, we're going to check out the match on the other side of the table. Brad Nelson on the left with a Siege Rhino in play against Jack Fogle on the right. I assume that the life totals are still somewhat healthy, but Jack playing a deck full of removal spells, and here we see Bile Blight targeting Siege Rhino.
Yeah, that is signaling a Delph spell on Fogle's side, and also he knows that Bioblight is almost dead, virtually dead in game 1.
Yeah, he'll have to use 2 copies of Bile Blight to deal with something like Siege Rhino or Tassiger in the first game. Sure, it can deal with some Elspeth tokens, but once an Elspeth gets going, you're not really winning the game that way.
But if Jack has an untapped land here, Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time are both live. If he hadn't cast that Bile Blight for a game 3, then they wouldn't. So that makes a big difference. If he passes here or has a Thoughtseize, that also works pretty nicely. I'm sure that we'll see a Dig Through Time.
Yeah, at this point we can be fairly certain with the 3 cards in his graveyard and the 5 untapped lands. So using his life total as a resource here, it's something we'll see a lot from the stronger control players. Okay, and we're going back to watch Steve Rubin against Ben Stark. So both players with lands in their first turn. Ben uses an Evolving Wilds to find the plains here. And alright, so that was the end of Steve Rubin's first turn. Now Ben with a 2-drop, Seeker of the Way, start things off.
He's holding at least a Soulfire Grandmaster and a Goblin Rebelmaster, so no shortage of early plays, and that is of course most punishing for an Abzan control deck with the mulligan to 5.
And game 1, Steve Rubin doesn't have access to Drown in Sorrow, which would have been incredible this turn, so he's looking like he's in a pretty rough place. He's going to need a spot removal spell for that Goblin Rabblemaster, but he's on 5 cards, and once he uses that 1 spot removal spell, it's seeming like he won't have much else to do.
Yeah, Steve Rubin is holding Abzan Charm, and we might see Ben play around that by not attacking with Goblin Rebelmaster.
Yeah, and that might be a wise choice by Ben here. He could just, make another Goblin token and send... So Ben's going to go ahead and send everything into the red zone. It's hard to play around cards in particular when your opponent's on 5, because you really want to capitalize on that, especially as the aggressive deck. A controlling strategy, if you let the game go long, it may not matter that they started with 5 cards, because in the end, they'll have more than you anyway. So if you end the game quickly, you can really punish them for those mulligans.
Yeah, you also don't want to play too conservatively, because then your opponent might have the one of end hostilities to punish you. Ben Stark also not really afraid of a removal spell here.
So Soulfire Grandmaster advancing his board state a bit. Steve, without much to do except play more lands.
Yeah, he's holding Liliana, Vess, and Elspeth Sun's Champion. So Liliana is one of the Planeswalkers with the least board impact, I would say. One old school Planeswalker, we have to say. And Elspeth is far off.
Elspeth will be happening for a little while here, and Liliana, while it will be able to search for something, maybe end hostilities, not quite fast enough here to get him back in the game. I mean, he's at 12, and he's going to be taking at least 6 damage this turn.
Yeah, and we are looking at 4 Wild/3 Lightning Strike, 4 Soak the Flames from Ben's deck, so
he has a lot to close the game with. So, Ben just going to scry there with Temple of Triumph, but passing the turn with 4 mana open. I think that means he might have a burn spell here. Courser of Prefix comes out for Steve Rubin, and he finds the land on top of his deck, so he's able to gain 1 and go up to 7, but... Ooh, and a Siege Rhino there. But Ben just going to fire off to Stoke the Flames, and with Steve Rubin tapped out, there's just nothing he can do, and he didn't have anything in his hand to interact anyway. So I think we're going to check in on the other match here for a moment. So, looking in, Brad is resolving a Read the Bones here. It looks as if Jack has already resolved a pair of Dig Through Times and a Treasure Cruise, which can't bode well for the former Player of the Year, who you'll see on your left here. Now, okay, So Jack Fogle down to 6 life now, but it seems like he has plenty of cards to fight his way through whatever Brad might have. Sure, Brad is at 21, but I mean, when you've cast 2 dig through times and a treasure cruise, it's pretty hard to lose a game.
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic here, and that is that the Sultai control deck is very good at stabilizing the board at some point, but it's not that good at getting out of reach because you don't have the counter magic power that some other control decks have. Like blue-black control is just full of dissipates, right? So Brad Nelson does actually have outs by, for example, just finding 2 Siege Rhinos and resolving them, of course. One of the few ways to gain life in Jack Fogle's deck is Garruk, Apex Predator, but you can even play around that to an extent.
Kiora, the Crashing Wave, coming down for Jack here. Really pulling further and further ahead. So, what do you think Brad needs to do at this point to win the game?
Brad is holding a handful of 7 cards, and we've seen this matchup in the hands of Alex Magelton, and he finished the game by basically winning the race. Brad Nelson is looking to deploy Elspeth. That's a card that Ashiok and Kiora will not deal with, so Jack Fogle needs to have an answer to that. And then I believe that we will be seeing Brad Nelson actually go for Siege Rhinos. Now, a disdainful stroke from Fogle might put the nail in the coffin, but this game is far from over.
So Fogle here, with the 2 mana open that would be necessary to counter a Siege Rhino here with Disdainful Stroke. Does he have it? And just going to take a look through Brad's graveyard here, see what's going on. And it looks like he does not have the Disdainful Stroke that would be necessary to deal with that Siege Rhino. So falling to 3 now.
And that's a big deal. Even if the Kiora prevents it from dealing damage next turn, that's not really what Brad Nelson was expecting anyway. You can't really hope that your Siege Rhino just gets there, right?
Yeah.
I think that Brad might only be sitting on a single white source. Maybe you can confirm that.
Yeah, it looks like there's just the Temple of Silence there, so
the Elspeth that we mentioned is...
It's actually stranded in his hand, yeah. Jack lining up his mana here. What is this? It looks like it's something big. And it's Garruk, Apex Predator.
Yeah, and that is exactly the card that Jack wanted. It is a life gain
there
spell.
We are. Right.
So that's basically a 3 damage burn spell there by Brad Nelson, Bile Blighting his Siege Rhino.
Yeah, so Bile Blight, Brad uses that on his own Siege Rhino. No targets for that Bile Blight in this matchup, so wisely using that just to minimize the 1 activation from Garruk on the other side of the table. When you're playing Elspeth into Garruk Apex Predator on the other side of the table, it usually does not seem like a good thing.
Yeah, that's a horrible feeling. Like, if Garruk is in play and you have to play a Planeswalker, you're not happy.
Yeah, the Axe does a pretty good job of dealing with opposing Planeswalkers. And Kiora ticking down and up and down and up, providing Jack with extra cards, as if he needed any more after resolving a pair of Dig Through Times and a Treasure Cruise. Bile Blight, not dealing with a whole card by just getting rid of the tokens from Elspeth, but because he's able to deal with the actual Planeswalker itself so easily, he's got to be pretty happy with that one. Alright, so just pulling further and further ahead. And there we see a Crux of Fate in his hand, too. And Nelson really does have his work cut out for him here.
So Garruk allowed Jack to gain life according to the toughness of the Siege Rhino that he killed, which usually has 5 toughness, but it got -3, so that's remaining 2 toughness.
Correct.
So he's up to 5 at this point.
Yeah, so, I mean, if Brad were able to draw running Siege Rhinos, although I think he may have played 3 already, I think. Even in our live look-in, we've already seen 3, so there might have even been a 4th while we weren't watching.
And he is facing the Garruk still, so I think the first step would be to get Garruk off the table, and as we've mentioned before, casting Elspeth is not the way to go in that regard.
Yeah, Garrick is just going to tick up and deal with that Elspeth.
And as I mentioned before, it is one of the very few ways to actually get out of burn range in that deck in game one.
And I mean, only one copy of it there, so not that hard to find singletons though in a deck when you're playing 4 copies of Dig Through Time and some number of Treasure Cruise.
Dig Through Time actually changing the math, changing the equation a little bit when it comes to deck construction.
Hey, you can afford to play a lot more one-ofs that your deck really needs access to in a lot of spots, because in a given game where you're actually able to play, you're going to see such a huge percentage of your deck that sometimes you see the entirety of your deck and still have 20 plus cards left. So
also some interesting decisions as to when to shuffle or scry. For example, if you are planning to cast Dig Through Time, usually playing a temple first is kind of redundant. So that's I really like how scry is smoothing out everything in this format.
Another thing that's interesting is if you're willing to go that deep, you could actually figure out what your draw steps are as you get later in the game based on what cards you put on the bottom with Dig Through Time. And that seems like something that, you know, is out of reach for a lot of people, but that is like some real knowledge that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, thankfully games aren't that grindy in the format.
So Brad with this Courser of Crewfix in play, trying to mount some sort of offense against Jack Fogle, but it just seems hopeless at this point.
If you would like to play for more Magic time, come on over to the Semifinals stage.
So currently have some interesting stuff going on here. I mean, another Dig Through Time resolving for Jack Fogle, and the game just gets further and further out of reach for Brad Nelson. Do you feel like there's any way that Brad Nelson could win this game? Because at this point, I am really unsure of what he could do to pull this all together. So if Brad were to win this game, let's imagine some fantasy world where it's possible. What would have to happen right now?
Magical Christmas Land?
Yes.
Has been called. A Garrick Apex Predator, maybe. An Ugin, and all cards that
aren't in his
aren't in his deck. Okay.
All right, so here we're going to check in back to our main match, and Ben Stark up a game here against Steve Rubin. And this is the post-boarded match against Abzan Control, where Ben, should be at a pretty big disadvantage. I mean, it worked out for him in the previous match. Will he be able to get there again? And that's the question. So a Sarkin getting in. And it looks like a Drown in Sorrow had already been deployed, and I think that just 1-for-1 with a Goblin Rabblemaster based on the graveyard we see from Ben there.
Yeah, and that's something you're happy about. We see the typical Fleas main line now a mainstay. We know that it's coming in for the Abzan decks. I'm sure you've talked about how Ben Stark has to approach this matchup after sideboarding, and I don't think it's hopeless, because you still have the early game threats, and then it's the most scary thing for a control deck, right? You have 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, but then once you've dealt with these, there's Stormbreath Dragons, Sarkins, all those good cards coming down, and we kind of see that here.
And Sarkin the Dragon Speaker, can't be killed by either of these murderous cuts that are stuck in Steve Rubin's hand, and he brings those in to fight Stormbreath Dragon, but the diversity of threats from Ben Stark here is just pretty incredible.
He now even,
Outpost Siege.
So that was the Hero's Downfall?
Yeah, so Rubin was able to find Hero's Downfall there to deal with Stark and the Dragon Speaker, but at this point now, Ben is drawing 2 cards a turn with Outpost Siege.
No. I was hoping for a Stark and the Dragon Speaker emblem at some point, but Rubin foiled that.
The grafted Skull Kappa standard. Alright, so able to play a Seeker of the Way there. Bile Blight coming down now on Seeker of the Way.
Steve Rubin happy to be able to kill a creature here.
Valor stance on Outpost Siege here. And it looks like Ben Stark has a pretty reactive hand here.
Yeah, not the best reveals here of Outpost Siege.
Yeah, I mean, he's only drawn 1 extra card off of it thus far. I mean, this matchup does get very controlling. I've been sideboarding. I mean, I've been pretty happy when people leave their outpost sieges in against me as an absent control player. But I mean, we've seen the card do a lot of work, and there it is, flipping up a Stormbreath Dragon.
To be fair, like 2 Valor Stances and a Chain to the Rocks is very, very unlikely to. Like whiffing 3 times is not something you would expect.
All right, so we have an update from the Brad Nelson Jack Fogle match. Here's BDA.
I know you guys looked in there for a couple minutes. Honestly, Brad got Jack down to 3, and it never looked close for Brad. Fogle cast 3 dig through times, cast a Treasure Cruise, cast an Ugin, cast 2 Kiaras, cast a Garruk Apex Predator, had 14 land in play, a full grip of cards, and eventually just buried Brad, who was still holding cards from his opening grip, and Hostilities, Utter End, and other cards that just didn't really impact anything. So he was able to, sort of get in there with some Siege Rhinos, but in the end, a Crux of Fate really just let, at exactly the right time from dig through time, got the match for Jack Fogle. The game for Jack Fogle, sorry.
Exciting stuff. So Sultai Control going up a game there against the Abzan Control. All right, so here we are. Soulfire Grandmaster getting revealed off Outpost Siege there for Ben Stark. And that's now 3 cards that he's netted off this enchantment. Already pretty good. And Steve Rubin there with a Fleece main line that could go monstrous, but instead choosing to leave that mana untapped, threaten the monstrous later on, gets in.
Yeah, this is like a little bit of a standoff here.
Yeah, there's the that careful dance that you have to play with Fleece main Lion and your opponent's removal spells. So by leaving open mana to constantly monstrous, you can essentially counter one of your opponent's removal spells, but your opponent has to leave open mana for their removal spells to prevent you from going monstrous with your Fleece main Lion. So it is this interesting, push and pull with that card. There we see Drown in Sorrow, a card that's exceptionally strong in the stack post board because you get to bring in 3/3s and things with 5 toughness, and those cards do a good job of. Interesting play. So Lightning Strike tries to kill the Fleece main Lion when.
No, he was targeting Steve.
So, I'm sorry. Lightning Strike targeting Steve, and Steve uses the opportunity where Ben is tapped out to make his Fleece main Lion monstrous.
That was basically the end of the dance. Steve was threatening monsters. Ben Stark knew it was happening, but he tapped out anyway for the value of activating his Grandmaster and
Stormbreath Dragon rumbling into the red zone here, and Steve Rubin falling down to 8, and he could very easily die.
That was actually a costly monsters activation because I believe that he's holding Murderous Cut among other cards. So we'll see if that might cost him ultimately.
I mean, he really needs to kill these Stormbreath Dragons on contact because with a life total at 8, I mean, your life total being divisible by 4 is kind of a big deal in a matchup like this because cards like Stoke the Flames and Stormbreath Dragon are such powerhouses. So there we see a Fleece main Lion and a Murderous Cut.
Yeah, and Stormbreath Dragon is not only 4/4 flying haste protection from void, but it also has the monstrous ability, which Ben Stark would be happy to activate.
Stoke the Flames there on Steve Rubin's end step for Ben Stark. And does Ben have another 4 damage spell or a dragon or a Sarkin here? Lots of cards that could do it for him, depending on what's in Steve's hand. And it's another Stoke, and Steve Rubin is eliminated in the semifinals. And Ben Stark going 4-0 in games against a matchup which is supposedly quite bad for him.
I really like how he looks like it's just another day at the office. It's like, just doing my job here. Just casting Outpost Sieges.
Ben Stark, ladies and gentlemen, Hall of Famer, Pro Tour champion, now Grand Prix Memphis finals competitor. And here we see Brad Nelson and Jack Fogle going into the second game here.
Oh, perfect timing, too.
Yeah. And right as they draw their opening hands, looks like a solid opener for Brad here. It looks like a solid opener for Jack also. So I think we may be off to the races.
I like the Abzan deck after sideboarding a lot in this matchup, and I don't know if it's just the few dead cards that you aren't going to draw, but it's also that I'm not too scared of the dig through time deck outcarding me. You have so many big threats that will often force your opponent to 2-for-1 themselves.
And that's something that's really impressive about the Absent Control deck played by the members of Team TCG Player this weekend, is that in post-boarded games, the deck becomes so much stronger. So you have, and it looks like Jack Fogle forced to mulligan here, so not going to be starting with 7 cards. But the Game 1 win percentage for this Absent Control deck has not been tremendous this weekend. However, in Games 2 and 3, you get to take all your dead cards out, and you really get to sculpt this nice game plan against any opponent, and it really makes your deck much better.
And if I'm Jack Fogle, I'm looking at my sideboard and I'm thinking, what do I do? Even if I know that the Fleece main lines are coming in, Furika's Cure and Drowning Soul are still not effective. Bringing in the creatures is kind of risky as well, because that's actually an angle that you didn't really want to play this matchup at. Especially the Death Dealers, they don't look amazing. I can see Tazigurs as a great card advantage engine. So that leaves you with Silence the Believers 1, Negate 2, Disdainful Stroke 2. That's it, but it's none of these break open a matchup.
Do you think he's going to bring in an extra copy of Liliana Abyss here? Or he doesn't have one main. Do you think he's going to bring in the Liliana?
I would. I think it's better than a lot of some other Planeswalkers, but he also does have... I don't want to say dead cards, but he has a lot of redundancy with other cards in the matchup, so I certainly wouldn't be surprised.
All right, so Brad gonna get a look at Jack Fogle's hand with Thoughtseize, and we see Tasigur, Sultai Charm, Murderous Cut, Dig Through Time, and Hero's Downfall. Now, if you're Brad, which card do you take here?
I'm always scared of Dig Through Time. This hand, after a mulligan, it kind of wants to cast Sultai Charm to get to lands, but on the other hand, it's not really generating an advantage if you draw 2 and discard 1, right? So I think Dig Through Time and Tasigur are the best cards in this hand, despite Jack Fogle not having the mana.
The other thing is there's an interesting dynamic between the Dig Through Time and the Murderous Cut, where Jack really can only play one or the other. So if you do want to leave him with Dig Through Time, then you also would definitely leave him with Murderous Cut, because each card makes the other slightly weaker.
I mean, depending on your hand, you might know that you have certain threats that you want to make sure your opponent can't deal with.
So Brad goes ahead and takes the Sultai Charm.
This is a bit more greedy, saying I'd rather buy myself time than to deal with some of your scarier cards.
And I mean, that's kind of telling Jack that you're looking to play a faster game plan here. But without white mana on turn 2 here for Brad, it's going to be interesting.
I don't... It's possible that I don't respect Sultai Charm too much, don't respect it enough, but I wouldn't have thought that that's the most scary card from your opponent.
Yeah, I'll be interested to ask Brad after the match what his reasoning was there. But he finds the Caves of Koilos, which is pretty nice here. It's a white source, necessary white source for him. So Thoughtseize on the top of Brad's library. And Jack does have a Hero's Downfall if he so chooses to use it here.
Yeah, we might see an example of Jack passing the turn to see what's up. That way he gets to see the next card on Brad's library. If it's a land, he can decide to kill a Cursor. If it's not, he can see if he gets to Disdainful Stroke.
And then
Siege Rhino. The Thoughtseize does make these kind of lines a bit awkward, but it's actually what we do see here.
Yeah, so because Brad has that land on top of his library, of course, this is during Brad's draw step. So Brad unable to play a land, and Jack is going to use Hero's Downfall to kill this Courser of Crufix. And if Brad doesn't have another copy of Courser of Crufix, then this is pretty nice. This is Jack essentially preventing Brad from getting an extra card out of the Courser.
Yes, and Brent Nelson is also suggesting with his land drops, he's taken pain and he's played 2 plain lands rather than temples or basics, that he might not have any more lands.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty aggressive to be playing Llanowar Waste and Caves right away.
Yeah, you basically only do that if those are your only lands. So probably there's a basic forest and a Sandsep Citadel. That was the card that was on top of Brad's deck. So he's fine spending that turn developing his mana.
Yeah, but look at this. Jack already basically has enough cards in graveyard and enough lands to cast that dig through time. So
I have a lot of respect for.
Right about what Brad should have taken with that Thoughtseize there.
I have a lot of respect for Dig Through Time. I've played it myself, and I've never been disappointed. Let's put it that way. The Thoughtseize here is really strong.
Yeah, you'll be able to take whatever he gets with the dig through time.
If he even casts it, it's not out of the question that you can just hold on to Disdainful Stroke this turn and just keep your graveyard intact, because now you get 2 cards. One of them is taken away. I think that's a good line to take here, but Jack definitely thought about not casting Dig Through Time.
So a lot of options here. Treasure Cruise comes to the front of the pile. He really wants to keep this card advantage train going, and Treasure Cruise seems to be the best option to do that in those 7 cards. So
yeah, the real problem is that's then most likely going to be the card that's being discarded. I think at this point, Brett is afraid of Delph spells.
Yes. Brad, however, could just take a counterspell depending on what he sees. So Disdainful Stroke there. The only card in Jack's hand that deals with the Elspeth that Brad is threatening to cast in the following turn, which is an important thing to note. And Brad may want to play this game in such a way that he really puts his eggs into the Elspeth basket. Yeah. And it looks like that's what he's going to do.
He's basically signaled that with discarding Sultai Charm in the beginning. He wanted that Sultai Charm to not be able to cast Corsair. He wanted to get a board advantage. He wanted to not allow Jack to draw out of his mana troubles. And by the way, Jack has just found a green source last turn. So Brad wants to be the aggressor, even though it's not an aggro deck. He is the one that wants to get a board presence going.
And now we have Jack going through his options here. Has his 5th land, still hasn't missed a land drop. Mulliganed a bit, but has recovered very nicely from this mulligan. And he's going to pass the turn back to Brad, who is looking to just jam an Elspeth this turn, I imagine.
We know he has a basic forest in hand.
Yeah, I mean, given the way he's played this game thus far, I can't imagine he can make any other play on this turn.
I just had an interesting thought, Jake, and that is, like, I'm a person that would discard Dig Through Time with that Thoughtseize, but maybe that's just saying that I'm thinking I need to be able to win the long game, and Brad is, in essence, he's saying I'm not winning the long game, but that's something that's really tough.
Because you're a control deck,
right? And you're a good player too, so you're like saying, I do not go down that path. I know my role, and it's not that. So
I mean, that means he has a lot of respect for Jack, and it also means that he may just understand this matchup. It's not a common matchup to play against, but we're talking about somebody playing a lot of Standard. Brad Nelson plays as much Standard as anybody these days.
Leader after the Swiss, right? I mean,
yeah.
I did a deck tech with him on Saturday morning, and I was... what he said was... It just all made sense.
Ooh, wow. So Sorin, the Sorin Elspeth combo, which is one of the nicest post-board combo assemblies this deck can muster. Pretty nice board here for Brad, and no cards that effectively deal with Planeswalkers for Jack. So, I mean, Brad threatening lethal damage here. I mean, sure, like a Crux of Fate or any number of cards could come down for Jack to wipe up Brad's board and give him more opportunities to draw out of the situation. But with 2 Planeswalkers on his side of the table, Brad looks like he's in a pretty good spot here. So, as it turns out, taking that Disdainful Stroke, a wise choice on his part.
Yeah, he needed to resolve Elspeth. If you're allowing your opponent the card advantage, then Elspeth is the card that you need to resolve.
Absolutely. Oh, and here we see Satyr Wayfinder. So that's going to fill Jack's graveyard a little bit and find him another land. And they'll allow him to cast something like Dig Through Time sooner, but it doesn't look like he has a dig through time in hand. It looks like he's really just trying to get to Ugin the Spirit Dragon. And he lands to see Evan play now. He has
6, about to have 7.
He's about to have 7. So, I mean, does Brad have to win on this following turn? Or, I mean, I guess he could thought seize Jack, but thought seizing Jack the turn before he has 8 lands seems like it's something that Brad might want to start doing.
Does Brad have cards in hand? He's sitting there as if he doesn't, but I mean, if Jack is just hoping that his Seder Wayfinder is keeping him alive, then there's a lot of cards that win Brad Nelson the game on the spot. And
Yes.
then we haven't even talked about Siege Rhinos, because those will even win after Ugin, post Ugin.
Jack will be absolutely forced to use the Ugin on the following turn to clean up this board state.
I'm honestly wondering if Jack took out all copies of Crux of Fate in this matchup, because there's so many ways for Brad to play around it. In particular, if your 2-drop also becomes indestructible at some point, and the Planeswalkers are the real threat, not the soldier tokens.
Absolutely. I mean, I would definitely not be surprised if Rats came out here.
Yeah, but
At
Brad
least
can't
some number of
know.
Bioplay probably come out also. Looks like Brad just has 2 lands and a Hero's Downfall in hand. He could just go for it?
Play Hero's Downfall and a Seder Wayfinder when your opponent's out is an Ugin the next turn.
I think so.
I think it's a viable line, but
I'm
you have to be
go for it.
you have to be a bit of a maniac to.
Yeah, you have to be amazing. It's one of those plans. It's like it's in one of those movies where it's so crazy that it just might work, kind of thing. Oh, and Jack with the murderous cut there, and that's gonna keep him just. Oh, it puts him at 3. I thought that would put him at.
Well, he was also able to block, right?
Yeah, so I was under the impression that he would be at more than 3 life after that, because he was able to stop 2 tokens. So I thought he'd be at 4 here.
Or if he was really at 12, we might have missed a point of damage
Yeah,
somewhere.
we missed a point of damage somewhere.
That wouldn't be the best card
Yeah, you
to
took your
cast
hand off.
here.
It does cost 8 legal play.
So, actually quite relevant if it's 3 or 4 life.
Yeah. Draw
Ooh.
2. Here it is. I mean, if Brad lets Jack untap here, he is in a very, very rough spot. But if he is able to find an answer on the top of his deck,
Yep.
then
This is how Brad has
it's a
played
Siege
this
Rhino,
game.
and
Brad,
beautiful. I mean, Brad played that game exactly how he had to win. Pretty impressive stuff from a former player of the year.
because if you
Looks like both of them need to take a quick restroom break mid-match now.
I'm not sure. Okay, Brad is leaving his smartphone. Jack also getting up, maybe. So that leaves us in the booth, Jacob.
Yeah,
No
I mean, we
magic,
can talk for
no
a
magic to be shown.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, so we have 1 game left in the Jack Fogle versus Brad Nelson match that we've been watching. And, I mean, it's an interesting matchup. And I think when we were looking at it, we were imagining how the long games would go post-board. But Nelson, approaching the second game, decided, I am not going to beat you in a long game. Instead,
But
we're
isn't
going
it-
to
isn't it
force
like-
these Planeswalkers.
Isn't it like he's thought seizing and then saying, I'm analyzing the exact contents of your hand. I'm extrapolating from the knowledge that I have on how I think you will sideboard. And then I'm deciding, I'm taking Sultai Charm, even though you have a vastly more powerful card in hand, because I envision me drawing the last 2 cards with Abzan Charm, finding the lethal Siege Rhino when you have 7 cards in hand after I've dealt with your Ugin. Right? That's like, he has a mental
Very well
image.
put. It was kind of, he had to be a visionary to find a way to win that game.
It's almost like a prep talk where it's not about how do I not lose, but it's like how do I see myself winning. And I think Brad did exactly that.
It's sometimes you tell the story before you write it down.
Yeah, and I would have discarded the dig through time there, and because I could easily see myself losing to dig through time, but then I would probably have lost to treasure cruise or something like that. You know, it's super interesting how you have to be, how it's not sufficient to be good, but you have to be great to know how to win, and that you have to just accept the losses as well. He opened the door for a loss to find the way to win.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about also, had he taken that dig through time, the game would have been completely different. So maybe he would have won anyway. However, the line he took did, give him the victory, and it was a very interesting line. He did not play that game how we would have expected him to. I don't think there are many people in this room who would play the game the same way.
I completely agree, and we've seen some tremendous magic in the feature match area. Ben Starr, absolutely amazing. Also, Steve Rubin impressed me tremendously when he played this Abzan mirror. I actually personally told him I don't know him, being from Europe and all, but I didn't see a single line that wasn't impressive. It was, and that's rare. Like, just because Magic is so complicated.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to play a game, let alone a match of Magic, without making any mistakes. And it's so easy to assume that when you lose, it's because of luck, or that when you win, it's because you drew well. But in reality, Magic is this game that's so complex and has so many layers that playing perfectly is just a pipe dream. The best players in the world rarely play a perfect game of Magic.
But they are the ones that know, right?
Yes, they're the ones that understand that complexity, exactly. I think that's one of the best pieces of advice for people who are looking to improve, is when you're playing a game of Magic and the game's over, whether or not you won or lost, instead of just thinking about it in terms of there are only two outcomes, I won or I lost, to run through the game in your head and to imagine all the other possible outcomes that could have happened, and to imagine how you could have played the game differently and what the results of the game would have been had you played the game differently. So would you have won more decisively? Would you have given your opponent less outs had you played a different way? And if you lost the game, had you played differently in different spots, was there anything you could do? And it's very important to stop assuming that mistakes are judgment calls, and to actually hold yourself accountable for those things so that you can learn from them.
If you just say, it was a close decision, I didn't get there, it was a coin flip, I didn't get there, then you aren't actually getting where you want to be, and that's the next level, right? So something I used to do a lot was, if I want, it's easier when you lose because your opponent is usually more willing to talk to you about the match. But depending on the situation, it also works when you've won. Is something like, oh, you cast that Hero's Downfall. Did you have that 2 turns ago? And then your opponent will be like, no, didn't have it, or he'll be like, totally had it, and then you can check back with your decision to hold back that Goblin Rebel Master, and that's how you learn. Even if it's, and I'm not saying you should be results oriented, but if you gather enough of those moments, there'll be a picture and a mental model of how to play Magic better.
And that's something that's really interesting in Magic also, is that the people who've been playing the game for so long, people like Ben Stark, who've been playing for 20 years at this point, they are so good at this game, and one of the major reasons for that is that they've been in all of these situations. Sure, he may be getting a little bit older and not have as much energy as a young kid who could be a super genius at the game, but when he's in a match, he can see all these different things, and he's been in those situations before. Okay, so it looks like Brad Nelson and Jack Fogle are back in the feature match area, shuffling up their decks, and we're about to watch the third game of their semifinal match, and this will decide who's going to face off against Ben Stark in the finals of Grand Prix Memphis. It's pretty exciting. Sultai Planeswalkers, a deck that we watched on day one, is just super exciting. A deck that we haven't really seen much since week 1 of Fate Reforged being out. This is a deck that I think initially was designed by Gerard Fabiano.
It was.
Yeah,
and he was able to win an Open with it, but after that, people have picked it up. It's a fun deck to play, certainly, but we haven't really seen it be dominant. We saw it at European GPs in Sevilla, and it was like, yeah, that's a deck you can play. Probably tier 1, maybe tier 1.5, but it didn't have the finishes. We still had blue-black control as the big control deck, And also, Absent Control was just slowly rising in popularity.
People were just starting to catch on to the power of the absent control strategy. Of course, this weekend, all of the non-believers have been silenced, if you will, as absent control has put just how many people did it put into top 8?
5.
Five different people.
I have not seen a less. I've not seen a less diverse. Does that make sense? Yeah, a less diverse top 8 in a long time, because we used to have this two decks of that, 2 decks of that, 1 deck of that, 1 deck of that, and that 5 of one archetype. That's a dominant performance.
And it's unbelievable, too, because this is a standard format where coming into the second day of competition, we had well over 20 archetypes represented.
Yes.
And 5 of the same deck, which wasn't even the first or second most represented deck.
And it's not 5 Absent decks, right? It's 5 Absent control decks.
Exactly.
So it's from the 3 possible variations of Absent, it's exactly one of them 5 times.
And the first most played deck in day 2, to make day 2, was red-white. The second most popular deck in day 2 was Jeskai. Then you go to Abzan Aggro, and then underneath that is Abzan Control. So this is there were 3 decks that were more represented in the second day of competition here at the Grand Prix, and yet this deck, the 4th most represented deck, put 5 people into the top 8.
I have to hold you back a little bit there, because this statistic is a bit skewed by the quality of the players that picked up Absent Control.
That's absolutely
right.
True.
We are looking at Brad Nelson, we're looking at Team TCG player, we're looking at Pro Tour regulars or former players of the year, right?
Yes.
This is something where I would expect Absent Control to have a much higher win percentage than any other deck in day 2, simply because of its pilots, which is the same if you look at Infact from the last Pro Tour, right? That
absolutely.
You can't only talk about the deck without talking about the players at this point.
Especially when you get this deep in a tournament like this, and especially when such a high percentage of the players who are on the absent control deck are members of Team TCG player. So Jack Fogle leading things off the Temple of Malady, deciding to sculpt his hand a bit there, or sculpt his hand of the future. Alright, so Brad going to go ahead and Thought Seize. Jack Fogle sees a hand of Ashiok, Ugin, and Disdainful Stroke, Lilianaves, and a second copy of Ashiok.
Brad, by the way, delayed that Thoughtseize for a turn. Now is the time. If he wanted to stop Ashiok, it would be to turn to do so. It is kind of awkward to see 2 of them, because that still means that one is coming down on turn 3. Brad drew. Well, he was down for the turn, so he does have answers to Planeswalkers. The question is, which Planeswalker is the more pressing threat?
And one thing I like about holding that Thoughtseize is that he saw Jack Fogle leave a card at the top of his library with Temple of Malady, so he knows that there might be an important card about to come out of Jack, and he wants to make sure that he sees what that card is with Thoughtseize and gets to take that card, as opposed to just firing it off with Reckless Abandon on the first turn, as many players might have.
Yeah, now that Ashiok has already found a Siege Rhino, if Brad has a black source here, I fully expect the Ashiok to go down.
Looks like he does not, though. Yeah, so now in a very rough spot here, this Ashiok is going to just be able to drop a Siege Rhino into play and still be there.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, this is not where you want to be as this Abzan control strategy.
So Brad is going to have to resort to drawing 2.
Draw 2 cards when his opponent has a Planeswalker and a Siege Rhino on the other side.
And look how much life he's losing this turn. 3 from the Rhino, 1 from the Fetch Land, 1 from the Wastes, and 2 from the Charm.
He's already at 10 here. Against a deck that doesn't play creatures or burn spells.
Might be one of these examples where you're playing against control and you think your life total doesn't matter.
And then suddenly it does. We've all been there.
This is something which I really like about this standard format. Ultimately, life totals are still highly relevant despite the power level of everything. It does matter that you're paying 2 life for Absent Charm. Oh, actually, is that being exiled?
I believe that's going to be exiled.
So Brad realizing that paying more life here is not how to win this game.
Brad finds the 4th land.
Oh, we didn't comment on what happened on Jack Fogle's side. He, after that powerful Ashiok turn, he actually didn't play a land, didn't play a spell, left open Sultai Charm. So both players with somewhat awkward turns here.
It looks like Brad does have, now that he has double black, he will be able to kill this Ashiok.
Yes, that was the top deck that he needed to cast Hero's Downfall. He's waiting on it. Currently, the Ashiok is not really scary. If you lose 3 cards or not, is not super relevant. He also played around a Disdainful Stroke by not casting something like Siege Rhino. Jack might have not found a land here with the Sultai Charm.
Ooh, so it looked at 2 cards with Sultai Charm, then looked at another card on the top of his deck. Still no 4th land for Jack Fogle. And this is kind of the situation that Brad was hoping for. I mean, he looked to be in a very rough spot against a pair of Ashioks, but now suddenly it seems like he might have a shot here.
Yeah, I might be tempted to not allow my opponent to counter my spells here, even though Brett has, I think, 3 castable spells, 2 Siege Rhinos and a Sorin. He has the patience to pass the turn, and I love that play.
Yeah, I mean, you know that your opponent's going to, be forced to discard.
Yeah, but
you keep getting hit.
Jack drew the land, and now things are different because now Jack has 8 mana if you count the graveyard, if you count Delph. So casting spells this turn actually prevents Dig Through Time from being cast.
Yes. So, Fred wisely using Siege Rhino here still has not given Jack an opportunity to use Disdainful Stroke, but this is going to be Jack Fogle's opportunity. Will he go ahead and counter that Siege Rhino? No. Instead, decides that Dig Through Time is more important, and I imagine he's going to find at least 1 land off this Dig Through Time.
No, maybe a Temple or a fetch land to fuel other Delph spells. Now that I think about it, Jack has often let one of his opponent's creatures resolve. Even if it's a Siege Rhino, if you are still on 20, you can take 2 hits and play your more important cards, because when you think about it that way, there's going to be later stages of the game where your mana is under constant pressure from the Abzan control deck / Fleaseman aggro deck.
Yes.
But this is the time where you can actually do things that you want to be doing. And I think he found a Seder Wayfinder, which is even better than a land, most likely.
So he has the green there to play Seder Wayfinder. Wow.
Card number 4.
Yeah. And now Jack actually seems to have a pretty solid advantage here. I mean, leaving open Disdainful Stroke, doesn't mind taking a hit here from Siege Rhino. Imagine Brad is just going to attempt to play another Siege Rhino into Disdainful Stroke. May instead attempt Sorin. It seems like it... no. So instead going for Siege Rhino here.
Brad Nelson values these Planeswalkers very highly. So if he's telling Jack, if you want to counter something, it's going to be Siege until you've dealt with them.
Yeah, and I mean, Jack at 14 here is hitting land drops, but he might need to use a card like Crux of Fate before... Yeah, so this is going to give Brad the opportunity he needs to resolve Elspeth.
And there's the Crux of Fate I talked about. I was wondering if Jack still had them, and I think they are an important piece of the puzzle here.
So, Hero's Downfall now, a very important card for Jack Fogle to find. This is Elspeth, and I mean, he may just be drawing for Ugin, right?
He discarded one of them, though. That was the cost of casting that Sultai Charm earlier.
So he does have 4 copies of Hero's Downfall in his deck, but I don't think he has any in his hand right now.
Yeah, so he's gonna go.
He's gonna go
looking
for one.
Looking for more.
There might be one under the ground here around somewhere. And yeah, exiling.
But then, do you also have Balblight still in the deck?
I don't know. I don't think you can afford to really.
There can't be too many. There can't be too many slots for these kind of cards. Like even Crux of Fate is not an amazing card to have, and Balblight is super narrow.
Yeah, Bioblade is extremely narrow. Maybe you keep it 1 copy.
Because you'll go through your deck eventually.
Yeah. Or perhaps you keep in a couple when you're on the draw, just so you don't get ran over by Fleecemane, and then you...
I mean, if Fleecemane wasn't part of the equation, then you certainly wouldn't have any.
Exactly, yes.
This is it. Siege Rhinos, dig 2 times, Goblin Rebelmasters. My top 3 cards in Standard.
Yeah. All very well represented here in the top 8.
The Rebelmasters, of course, waiting in the finals.
He's ready, and coming into this tournament, everybody knew Goblin Realmmaster was the card to beat. It had a target on its head, and yet Ben Stark, Hall of Famer, manages to best the field with it anyway. And ooh, Jack Fogle here, pulling very far ahead, able to cast Hero's Downfall there on Elspeth and leave open 2 mana to be able to use a counterspell on Brad Nelson's Sorin.
Yeah, the Disdainful Stroke. Brad Nelson somehow resolved 2 Siege Rhinos and an Elspeth through his opponent holding a known Disdainful Stroke.
Yeah. Very careful planning by him, but still, not a great spot here.
This is the game plan he committed to in game 2 and in game 3. He is viewing himself as the aggro deck. He knows that there's a lot of cards in Jack Fogle's deck that don't actually do all that much when you look at it. But that means hoping and praying from time to time.
And I mean, Jack at this point can just search his library for Ugin, the Spirit Dragon.
But if Brad attacks Liliana here, then that is not a super effective use of 5 mana on Jack Fogle's side. He has so many cards that it's definitely correct to run things out there, but it's not something that's scaring Brad at this stage. And if this is we just saw it is Ugin. Even Ugin is quite beatable, I feel like, and forcing Jack to maybe tap out of Disdainful Stroke mana again. So Brad Nelson is feigning weakness here in a sense. He hasn't cast a spell, so Jack might just be thinking, hey, maybe he's out of gas, maybe he doesn't have anything.
Maybe his hand's just a bunch of lands.
See, he's just running out these lands. He's like, yeah, I got nothing, right? So Jack cast that Ugin, and now Brad might be exploding. He might have Hero's Downfall, Sorin, Siege Rhino, Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize he'd probably have cast, sure, but
I think he just has Sorin and an unknown card in hand. It looks like he was able to find a Tasigur.
That's
So
something.
he has Tasigur and Sorin, but I mean that Ugin is at 7 here, so he really needs to get pretty lucky to.
Yep. Trying to downfall it.
So hopefully 2 lands on the top of my library, please.
Or just more downfalls.
Yeah, or another downfall. Oh, and there's Thoughtseize there. So I will wager dollars to donuts that Brad's going to pick up that Thoughtseize. And will we just see another Tasker activation here? I imagine that's what we're going to see, because I think finding Hero's Downfall is so important in this spot. And, getting a... you even will be able to... and an Absent Charm gets revealed. So Jack Fogle likely going to send that Absent Charm to Brad Nelson's hand here.
No.
No, gives him the Hero's Downfall. All right. So,
Jack Fogle is fully on the plan to deplete his opponent completely of resources, and Absent Charm would be a way to refuel, maybe find a new Tasigur or whatever. But here, if the value that Jack is getting from his Ugin is huge. Oh, so that tells us that he's likely not going to mine his Ugin, but deal with Tasigur in another way.
Yeah, so he's got some type of removal spell here, or he has Sultai Charm.
Yeah, but I find that a bit confusing, because if you know that if you give your opponent willingly give your opponent the Hero's Downfall, then I would much rather have the Ugin on 1 loyalty. It's still a threat that Brad has to deal with.
He also has a negate in his hand that I just saw, though, so his Ugin is safe.
Okay,
from
so
that Hero's Downfall.
So he can protect Ugin and kill Tasigur.
Precisely. Although he does know that Brad has both Thoughtseize and Hero's Downfall. because he just put both of those cards in Brad's hand.
There's a lot of known information here, yes.
Yeah, there's a ton of not so hidden information.
Okay, so we do get to minus Ugin. Say the Wayfinder, just a victim of sequencing.
So maybe he decided that he would go looking with Treasure Cruise for a more efficient way to deal with Tasigur, and then when he didn't find it, the 1/1 not excessively relevant. So Brad going to lead with Thoughtseize here. Just going to go ahead and negate Thoughtseize. 2 Planeswalkers on the battlefield for Jack now. Brad able to Hero's Downfall this Ugin, but it's already done a ton of work. It dealt with an Elspeth, it dealt with a Siege Rhino, it dealt with a Sorin. Solemn Visitor coming down and making a Vampire token here for Brad. So, what do you think Brad can do to win the game from this point?
He just wants to draw Planeswalkers and read the bones, abs and charms. Jack Fogle can't stop everything. He doesn't have that many counter spells. In a sense, Brad has dealt with a lot of the good cards in Jack's deck, and Jack still needs to present something that wins him the game. Running Jack out of threats, if you string together a bunch of card draw spells, is a possibility.
And now both Ugins now gone for Jack, I believe.
Yes.
So at this point, Brad could just completely run Jack out of ways to win the game. So what does Jack have to do to end Brad here? What finishers does he still have left available? One
of them is actually in play. Kiora, at such a stage when you're holding Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, you can just go for the ultimate. And this, look at that. Read the Bones. That's the beginning.
Read the Bones is a very nice card there for Brad, and it gets in underneath the Disdainful Strokes of Jack Fogle's hand. Brad gonna bottom both of those cards, looking for some juice. And let's see, what did he find? He found a Hero's Downfall, which can deal with this Kiora, but it's questionable for him right now.
There's going to be too many Planeswalkers on Jack's side. That's the issue. I can see Ashiok closing out the game. I can see Garruk closing out the game. I can see Liliana Vest closing out the game. Even her ultimate is she dead?
Her ultimate returns
no,
all of the creatures from
I think she was already used this game.
Oh yes, she was already used. She searched for the Ugin.
So she's also gone. That leaves Tasigur as a great card for Jack to draw. If he gets a Tasigur online and returns 2, maybe soon 3 cards with it, that should also put the nail in the coffin.
He has plenty of land at this point, so not going to be too difficult for him to pull that off. So an interesting twist of events here. 5 Abzan control decks here in the top 8. And if Jack Fogle wins this game, and it's looking pretty good for him at this point, then no copies of Abzan control make it through to the finals. So still a great choice for the weekend, but not the deck to play. Another dig through time here for Jack, just pulling further and further in the card war. It's interesting though. It's a vampire.
Jack has found Garruk. Garruk Apex Predator.
Ooh, and there is Garruk Apex Predator.
And Tasigur. So no shortage of win conditions at this stage.
Yeah, and I think with the Disdainful Stroke in hand, Jack will be pretty happy to deploy 1 or 2 of these threats and attempt to take the game over.
Yeah, it's funny how Garruk isn't even that great on this board. Its best use is generally to kill Planeswalkers when it comes down.
Garrick has been so good this weekend watching this deck play. I mean, we've watched it kill planeswalkers repeatedly, kill creatures, get him out of burn range.
No, there's
downfall.
times where you're thinking having more than one would really be worth it.
Yeah.
And then there's other matchups where you never want to draw it.
Exactly, it just costs way too much. Now, even there, we saw the 7-mana card get dealt with via Hero's Downfall, but Jack's still accruing some advantage there because he has that beast left over. And that's something about removal spells in today's standard, is that so many of the things that you're using the removal spells on have already done something at the point that you're using them, that you really need to accrue card advantage or board advantage in some way if you're going to be playing a lot of removal.
And still we're seeing so many removal spells, right? That's the funny part.
Well, I think the major issue is that cards like Goblin Rabblemaster and Monastery Mentor are cards that if you cannot leave them on the table, because...
So in a sense, we have Goblin Rabblemaster punishing you for not having a removal spell, and Siege Rhino punishing you for having it because you're losing value. And actually, Mantis Rider, if you add it to the Jeskai deck, you have both, right? You have the card that punishes you for not having it, the card that punishes you for having it.
It's a very interesting format, and the deck construction is getting more and more complex as we get further into this standard season. Right now, playing to 9. Once again, the Vampire getting bubbled.
And Jack is actually working towards the ultimate. Kira's ultimate, that is.
I believe he gets to put is it a Kraken?
Kraken, yes. 9/9 Krakens.
Every turn. Forever. It's an interesting emblem.
Brett Nelson also on 9. Not that the Krakens are going to appear out of nowhere here. But that's it.
So Jack Fogle moving on to the finals to face off against Hall of Famer Ben